My mother had the most beautiful teeth. Her teeth are my first memory. I remember them long and wide and bearing a ferocious grin, shining under the moon as she told me a story. Not a fairy tale or picture book, but my story. The story of how I'd come to her, or rather, how she'd come to me. When I was very small, too small to remember anything at all, my mother stole me from a man and took me to live in the forest. She stole me not as an act of love, but as an act of revenge. Though I was desperate to know, she never told me what needed revenging. One night, I finally asked, "Why won't you tell me?"
"Because you are my baby,"
she whispered in her low, wet voice. She stroked my face with her long fingers. Her teeth glittered under the stars, rich and pale as polished ivory.
"My baby will never hear, or see, or know the cruelties that haunt me."
Cruelty was not the only thing that my mother knew that I did not, although it was the only thing that she refused to teach me. My mother tried very hard to teach me everything else she knew. Unfortunately, I was a very poor pupil indeed. My mother was a remarkable huntress. She felled elk and bear effortlessly. Sometimes she slid into the lake without so much as a ripple and returned hours later with a monstrous fish clamped in her jaws. Because hunting came so easily to her, mother expected me to learn quickly.
"Men hunt.
She hissed.
They have always hunted. So shall you."
But I could not hunt, not like her. My small, soft fingers were no match for her lethal claws. My clumsy little body, somehow so susceptible to both heat and the cold, trailed after a whip-like predator's form. Mother caught deer and fox with her beautiful teeth, striking from the shadows like a snake. By contrast, my dull teeth could not even crush rabbit bones. I persevered, but did not improve. One night, while mother snaked through the shadows, communing with trees and evading the dark things prowling in the night, I curled up and wept. She found me that way, weak and weeping. I covered my eyes and held my breath. I knew it was useless. Mother could hear my heartbeat from the other side of the hill, so she surely knew I was crying. But that small scrap of pride was all I had. Mother stood there for a long while. Then she crept forward and covered me with fresh leaves before lying beside me.
"I will feed you always,
She whispered.
because you are my baby."
In addition to hunting, my mother was a phenomenal creator of shelters. Sometimes she lived within the earth, snaking through loam and tree roots like treasure-hoarding dragons of old. Sometimes she lived in the trees. Many nights I watched in awe as her bones elongated and tore through her rough skin, stretching upwards to twist among the branches like an ancient spider god. I would wait patiently, sometimes for hours, as mother communed with the spirits buried in the roots. And sometimes she lived in the shadows, creeping through the darkness to flush out food and thread alike. So mother tried to teach me to dig burrows, but I could not dig like her. I was too small and too soft, and far too frightened of the bugs and moles that tunneled through the earth. She tried to teach me to live among the tree branches, to rest and listen as the redwoods murmured the long, strange history of the earth. But my bones could not stretch like mother's. I could not twist my arms to match the branches. My skin would not interlock with the tree bark, and my blood was too sluggish to melt into the sap. So mother tried to teach me to live in the shadows, but the darkness terrified me. Every night I hid and wept, imagining the legs of centipedes crawling across my skin. All the night creatures reveled in my fear. Owls swooped down to taunt me, and bats torpedoed toward me, giggling in their shrill, squeaking voices until mother slapped them out of the sky. Finally, mother realized the futility of these lessons, so she dug a deep burrow just for me. She lined it with leaves and slurped the worms and roaches from the walls. When she finished, I burst into tears.
"Why do you weep?"
She rasped. "Because you do everything for me." I knew the laws of nature. I knew the law of forest creatures and their young. Young that are weak were killed in the nest. Young that could not learn to fend for themselves were abandoned to die. I was weak and soft, encoded in terrible, ugly scars. Why do you do everything for me? Mother snaked forward, long, large hands sinking into the earth. She curled around me and pulled me close.
Because you are my baby.
Mother did not always live in the burrow with me. She roamed the mountains. She burrowed with moles, slithered with snakes, grazed with elk, hunted with wolves, stood with trees. When I was small, I thought she ate the forest, but it was not that simple. She protected it, and in return, it sustained her.
My heart
She told me one rainy night.
is the forest, so this is how it must be.
As I grew older, I developed rudimentary survival skills. I shied away from hunting big game, elk and deer, bears and boar, because I did not protect the forest. I gave in nothing. I only took, so I took as little as I could. I trapped rabbits, fished the streams, and ate wild berries. I dared take nothing else. Once I could reliably feed myself, Mother stayed away for long stretches. Hours, then days, and finally weeks. I missed her terribly, with a deep, panicky ache. I confronted her about it on one balmy spring evening. You leave me more and more, I accused. Soon you leave me forever,
Never.
she murmured. A breeze twined around us, raising goose flesh on my skin and rippling her long white hair.
I will never leave you.
But you do! You already do!
Before you came, I lived among the trees, listening to the warnings. I slept in the warm earth as worms and centipedes nibbled my skin. So many lives at a time that I forgot my own name. I do not leave you. I have never left the forest for you.
I didn't come here, I sobbed. You took me,
I did.
she said.
So I will never leave you. When you think I've left, silence yourself and listen. Listen for me the way I listen for the trees, the animals, and the stars. If you are silent and you are sincere, you will hear me.
And then she left. Fury and jealousy seared my heart like a wildfire. She insulted me. She humiliated me. And after all that, she left me. Left me for the centipedes and wolves and the stupid, chittering bats. I don't need you, I screamed, and owl hooted angrily in response. I don't need you at all. Then I ran for my burrow. As the earthen door materialized before me, nodding with flowers and wild grasses, anger swelled inside me. It possessed me, this wild ball of misery born of my own endless fear and inadequacy. And it spoke to me. Why should you return to the burrow? It asked. Why indeed? It wasn't mine. It was Mother's. The entire forest belonged to Mother. Without her, the forest would have consumed me long ago. So I turned away from the burrow and kept running. I will find the end of the forest, I decided. I will leave it once and for all. I ran for days, in the process treating the forest with contempt. I stripped the trees of their leaves to make nightly beds. I threw rocks at birds and rabbits. I uprooted bushes and stripped entire groves of their berries, eating until I threw up from sheer excess. Then I ate again. Not out of hunger, not out of any need, but out of malice. And one day, long after spring ceded to summer in a verdant explosion of heat and greenery, I heard voices. I froze immediately. The only voice I knew was Mother's, wet and low, an earthy, rib-shaking whisper. These voices were nothing like Mother's. They were high and somehow infantile, with strange, shrill notes. These voices, they were like mine. Trembling, I dropped low and crept through the underbrush. Sun-warmed leaves brushed against my face, smooth but painfully crisp. The sun was taking its toll on them. I snaked over the ground, pretending I was Mother, slipping through the forest like an invisible snake. I reached a break in the trees and peered through. In a small clearing were 4 creatures. They had pink skin and wore heavy clothing that looked suffocating. Their hands were small and soft. Their faces were smooth and baby-like, somehow half-formed, wide-eyed and rounded, with soft noses and plump flesh. I touched my face, flat and smooth, and looked down at myself. Mud-streaked, deeply tanned and marked with a hideous mess of scars, but still soft. Hairless, small, weak. There was no mistaking it. These things in the woods, these overdressed half-formed beings with small teeth and no claws and overlarge eyes, they were like me. They were men. I stood up, propelled by panic excitement, and strode forward. All at once they froze. "What the hell?" one whispered. He lifted something in his arms and pointed at me. It was long and strange to me. Inorganic, not alive, with a wooden handle and a gleaming tube. Just then, I realized something. The forest was silent. A few birds chirped and sang, and a few bugs emitted a persistent drone. But the vast majority, birds, insects, trees, were silent. No rabbits, no deer, certainly no bears. These things, these creatures like me, these men had silenced the earth. They'd stolen the forest from itself. We stared at each other for a long time as ever-growing summer heat filled the clearing like an invisible pool. "Mother," I whispered. "Mother, please help me." She didn't, so I turned and ran. The men immediately pursued. I could hear them, yelling, crushing the undergrowth, stamping on blossoms and bugs, snapping branches as they ran. The forest's deathly silence was worse than any cry. "There it is!" one of them screamed. A second later, the forest exploded. A deafening boom shook the trees and ate through the air as pain erupted in my shoulder. I didn't dare stop or look. I pressed on, running and crying as the men came after me. The forest seemed to punish me for my earlier cruelty. Brambles scratched my legs, stone cut my feet, branches swiped at my face, leaving deep, stinging runnels. I thanked the forest for its kindness. I thanked it for punishing me rather than stopping me. The men gasped and wailed amongst themselves. "What the hell is it? I don't know. Is it a kid? Look at his face, look at his fucking face. That isn't a kid." Something suddenly filled my ears, drowning the sounds of the men in the forest. A deep, musical rushing like birdsong transformed into a turbulent river. And then Mother came, erupting from the trees like a great beast of old. But that's what she was after all. A great beast, surely a demon of the ancient world. She pounced upon the men, batting them the way a house cat bats its toys. She clamped one between her claws, squeezing until his head separated and went rolling across the ground. One by one, Mother caught and tore them, shredding them the way she shredded leaves from my bleeding. Blood streaked the forest, turning the dirt to mud and dripping from trees like sluggish rain. Mother dug her claws into the skull of the lost survivor and cracked it open like a fruit. Blood and grey brain glistened in the sunlight. The man screamed and screamed and screamed. Mother leaned down and extended her tongue. It curled outward, pale and orange gold like sunrise on a cold, clear morning, and delicately slurped his brains, curl by curl, like so many worms from my burrow walls. By the time he stopped screaming, the forest had returned to its loud, familiar glory. Murmuring trees, singing birds, skittering insects, grazing deer. I smiled and ran to Mother. She reared up and screamed.
See what you've done!
Terror paralyzed me. I looked helplessly at her, blazing eyes, contorted face runneled with earthen wildflowers, sun-bleached bone, and pale, spongy rot. My mother, my beautiful demon mother who claimed me out of revenge and raised me out of obligation, staring at me like I was a man.
When you stone a bird, my heart stops. When you break a branch, my bones snap. When you selfishly strip the shrubs of their fruit, of their very birthright, my skin blisters. When you hurt the forest,
She roared.
my heart bleeds.
I fell to my knees and hid my face. Mother rushed forward on her many limbs and wrapped long fingers around my throat. She lifted me up, dangling me over the forest floor.
I killed men for you. Now more will come. They will trample. They will cut. They will burn. They will kill. They will kill the bears and the cougars and the wolves, for they will blame the predators for what I have done for you. Do you see?
She shook me. The carnage below seemed to swing beneath me, a tapestry of blood-soaked earth and ruined corpses.
Do you see?
Yes, Mother, I whispered. I see. She dropped me. I hit the ground with such force it knocked the wind out of me. Mother pulled back and busied herself with one of the corpses. I looked up shaking. Birds watched from the trees, quick and curious and full of condemnation. I averted my eyes as tears spilled. Mother returned to me. She extended an arm and opened her hand. Up on her large palm were 4 eyes and a large, glistening heart. I stared at them blankly, then looked up at her.
4 eyes. One from each man, and the heart of the one that shot you. Eat.
My lip quivered. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the gore in my mother's hand. A heart and eyes, raw and plump, alive just minutes ago. Mother, I said, please.
Are you of me,
She asked.
or are you of man?
The forest became painfully silent. The animals, the trees, and the insects, all waiting with bated breath. I am of you, Mother. I plucked the first eye from her palm. It was round and curiously firm, with a sort of firm, watery texture that I associated with half-rotten fruits. The pink, wormy optic nerve dangled. For a terrible moment, I thought I would vomit. Then I raised it to my lips and bit in. The eyes were awful, the heart even worse, thick and almost impossible to chew. Mother had to tear it for me, slicing it into manageable pieces with her beautiful teeth. When I finished, Mother picked me up and held me tightly, streaking back to the burrow as night fell. That night, I became ill. I shook and shivered and hallucinated for days. My mind bled with images of dangling eyes and glistening hearts and skulls cracked apart like pomegranates. Mother lay with me all the while, soothing me with ancient songs like birdsongs turned to rivers and cooling me with her damp, earthy breath. Finally, the fever broke. I sat up, gasping as the last vestiges of my nightmare drifted away. Mother sat across the burrow, hunched over tiredly.
You are well.
She said.
I am glad, for I must leave.
I blinked tiredly. Why?
Men.
She said. But you killed them.
There are more. They creep into the forest, searching for their dead brethren. They are cutting the trees and crushing the flowers, and killing the bears, my little one. If I don't stop them, they will even come for you. I have to stop them. My heart is the forest, and so are you. I must protect both.
A lump rose in my throat, shame like I'd never known enveloped me. I'm so sorry.
You are my baby. Babies must learn. By learning, they grow.
Mother, am I truly of man? Mother closed her eyes. For a long time she did not speak. Then she drew a deep breath. I listened, enraptured and horrified as she spun her sorry tale. Mother was once a young, beautiful human woman. Surely not more beautiful than you are now, I objected.
Listen,
She said. Mother was alone in the world. She had no family or friends. She once had a family, but they harmed her greatly, so she ran away. She lived in the forest in a small ragged tent. She ate wild berries, fished the lake, and boiled water to drink. Laws are a strange thing. Though Mother hurt nothing and no one, she was breaking the law by living in the forest. She was found and caught and imprisoned. Separated from the trees and the birds, Mother faded quickly. Though she was only jailed for a short while, it nearly killed her. The day she was released was the best day of her life. Or so she thought. No sooner had Mother gathered her meager belongings and exited the jail, a guard came up beside her. "Where you headed to? I'll take you wherever you want to go." Mother was ecstatic.
take me back to the forest.
She said. The guard obliged, driving her towards the woods. Except he stopped too soon. He stopped at the house, his house it turned out. The guard was a terrible man. He trapped Mother. He hurt her, tortured her, abused her in every way. He cut her open, he burned her, he snapped her bones, and he put a baby in her. Mother was so broken that he missed all signs of impending childbirth. When I came, Mother died.
He dumped me in a vat of acid
Mother told me.
and scattered my liquid remains among the trees. But then I heard you.
Mother smiled faintly. Crumbles of dirt and root fell from her face.
I heard you cry. Your need for me.
I do not understand what Mother said next. It's difficult to translate, but the closest I can come to is this. Everyone sings a song to those they love. Most aren't able to hear these songs. If you can't hear, it can't help you. But if you can hear it, a song is the most powerful thing in the world. It kills, it calls, it consumes, it destroys, it strengthens, and sometimes it resurrects.
When I reformed and breathed again, I stole you from your father.
Mother said.
Then I brought you here because you are my baby.
I wept silently because I didn't know what to say.
I must go.
She said.
The trees and the animals need me now. So remember, little one, when you are silent and you are sincere, you will hear me.
Then she whipped around, like a wolf, a snake, and a hawk combined, and left. She did not return. At first, I thought nothing of it. I had made a terrible mess. I had summoned men. I had caused the forest to bleed. Mother had a great deal of work ahead of her. But summer slowly bled into fall, and still Mother did not return. When the first snow came, dry and cold, skittering across the landscape like powder, I knew that something was wrong. The snow steepened. The forest drifted into its winter sleep, cloaked in ice and fog. Every night I made myself silent. I mustered all the sincerity I could and listened for my mother's voice. It didn't come. I grew thin and sick. My skin burned even as I shivered. My chest grew congested, my throat so sore I couldn't sleep. My breath came in sharp, pained wheezes. Soon I became too weak to leave the burrow. I crawled to the doorway and ate the snow. For sustenance, I slurped worms from the earthen walls. It was not enough, and I knew it. Only then, in the quiet and peace of fear of approaching death, did I become truly silent. Only then did I hear the voice of my mother. I heard her in my dreams, the low, rushing voice like music made into water. "I am coming," she said.
I am coming. Because you are my baby.
I smiled and slept. Next thing I knew, I was cold and wet and shivering, but awake. I shut up and screamed as my skin brushed the thick, flower-matted hide of my mother. I spun around, smiling, and froze. Mother lay beside me panting. Blood seeped from 100 wounds crossing her hair. The exposed bones in her face were crushed and concave, leaking gore and blood. Without opening her eyes, she smiled.
I heard you. I heard your song.
Tears blurred my vision. My chest began to hitch. I couldn't draw breath. It was like I was sick again, drowning in pus and trapped fluid. Only I wasn't dying this time. My mother was. Then stay. You have to stay because you can hear my song.
No.
She said.
You needed to see me again, but you do not need me.
I need you, Mama. I need you.
No.
She said.
I killed all who would harm you.
But what about the forest? The forest will kill me without you. She chuckled. Her breath came terribly fast and increasingly weak.
You are of me. Remember, you are of me. You are my baby.
My mother, my beautiful, ancient mother, drew a shallow breath and lay still. I lay beside her for many days. Then when she began to stink, I left. A hiker eventually found me. A stupid, solitary hiker with a soft heart, a great deal of patience and no fear. When I learned to speak the words of man, the authority lost no time in telling me that my mother was not really my mother. They discovered my identity through DNA. My real mother, they say, was a vagrant, a John Doe who lived in a tent in a national park. She was alone and defenseless, two things that attract human monsters. After a brief stint in jail for loitering, my mother ended up kidnapped, imprisoned and tortured by an as yet unidentified assailant who eventually tried to successfully dissolve her in acid. They think he attempted to dissolve my body too. That's why I'm covered in scars. It is why I frightened those hunters so long ago. The acid burns make me look like a monster to man. Since my real mother had apparently died long ago, they decided that mother, whoever she was nothing but a crazy, homeless child abuser. But I know better. Even so, I had adapted. I had no choice. I am of my mother, but I live among men. That's what animals do. Their young learn, grow, and adapt. If they don't, they die. But I'm not adapting anymore. At least, I am not adapting to live among men. My mouth is changing in ways that are terrible to people but wonderful to me. It's my teeth, you see. I am growing my mother's beautiful teeth. Looking at my teeth in the mirror was frightening and electrifying. Joy and terror ran through my veins in equal measure. It had to mean something, so I felt silence. I became sincere. I listened. And I heard. I heard the voice of my mother, low and rushing, like birdsong turned to a wild river. She tells me I do not belong with man because I'm her heart, and her heart is the forest. She tells me I must return, and she tells me she is waiting for me because I am her baby. I crawl, thirsty, bitter, so bitter, but I must eat them. The things that grow, they came here in a recent time. The growths are bright, they have a neck, and there is a ball on top of the neck. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 round fans attached. Is this light? This light, this color, I don't know. It makes me think of algae, slime, and moss. I approach a patch of growth and my feeder splits open. They dance when I rip my tongues around them and rip them out. Bitter, burning. Did they come here because they hate me? Why? I don't understand, but I feed. When I am finished, I crawl back down from the ceiling and lie down in a trickle of wet. A stream. The rocks are sharp and bumpy, but my skin shapes to fit, and my bones shuffle around so they can fit too. Pores open. I drink, and I flush. The vines must hate me, because they still hurt me after I eat them. They claw at my insides, but I relax and let my tubules slacken and droop out of my pores. They fan their plumes into the stream, and I can feel the hurt of the vines drain from my body. Then I eat again. I drain, eat, drain, and eat until my membranes are swollen and full. After that, I can leave the bride and go back into the calm and the soft. I found a toy today. I did not bring it into the bride, but it feels hard and round, but also hollow. There are 2 round holes in the front and a roll of dull pegs at the bottom. I think it's missing a part. I will bring it back to Mother and see what she thinks. It's a challenge to scuttle back down to where I sleep when I'm so full. There is nothing else to be done though. The pointy tips of my legs strain and shiver and my joints ache. Stop, smell, send a pulse. I am at the deep well and I am relieved. The hard cuticle plays on my back pop and release, letting me curl into a ball. It's a strain to fit my swollen organs inside, but I do, and I roll forward, off into the shaft. It hurts to hit the ground again, but I am okay. I uncurl and follow the path home with sound and smell. Now it's easy because Mother has started to smell very strong, and she hasn't moved in a long time. That makes me happy. My pedipalp sends a membrane ahead, which I carefully slice through, and when I am inside, I excrete from my glands to seal it back up. Mother, why won't you come and help me? And my sisters, I cannot hold off the bride all by myself. She's sleeping. I hope she will be okay. I nestle the new toy in her tail and curl up beside her. My sisters must be outside. They will come back, I know it, so I sleep. We sleep. The growths do not taste good. They do not make me feel less hungry, so I still have to find food. For me, for Mother. My sisters are probably doing the same. I know, but the hunger is bad and the vines are bad. Below. Must go down. There are spiders and worms and curlybugs in the dry, but not many. Better to go below into the wet. I don't know how far down the world goes. It is filled with the wet because all streams go there and I can only breathe the wet for so long until I start to choke and drown. It's worth the risk. I catch lots and lots of crunchy bugs that can live in the wet, big or small, slender or stout. They are all very tasty. Sometimes they pinch me on the inside with their little claws after I have swallowed them. They do not bother me like the vines do, but I get scared of getting stuck down in the wet. Not even Mother would know what happened to me. Mother. Yes, I hold some of the crunchy bugs in my feeder and carry them back home for Mother. I leave them by her and I start to feel bad because I know where I have to go next. Up. Climbing the great well is always easier when I have eaten. I am up in no time and can already see the bride, like steam from the warm vents, but cold. There is more. It doesn't make sense. I eat as much as I can, and when I come back, there's always more than the time before. I'm trying to stop, but I don't know if I can, and I do the only thing I can think. and eat, rip, and tear until I am unable. Flush out my pores, hurt is gone. Eat some more, flush, full. I go home again, roll into the shaft all the way down. I get half the way back home to mother, but the hurt has come back. I don't know why. Why is it hurting? I flushed them out. A pressure builds up inside me, up my foregut until I can feel it pushing out against my feeder. I cannot hold it. Feeder splits and violent bubbling acid comes flooding out all over the ground. Bits of chewed vines float around in the puddle. I don't think they are dead yet. Not all of them. They are still bright. Oh no. The bright, it's trickling down. Down the steep tunnel and down towards home. No, no, no. What if my sisters run into it? Will they hate me? Maybe they will help me. Maybe. Need to get home. I wake up. Where am I? Not home. I cannot smell mother. It's so bright and... Oh, no, no, please, no, no, no. The bits of growth that escaped me are still there, but there are more of them. They are spreading and they keep going in a line down the tunnel. I spring to life and claw my way up the walls and onto the ceiling, and I crawl towards home. I do not want to touch the groves. I can't anymore. They are scary. I keep going. The bride shows me something at the inside of the tunnel. I think it's one of my sisters, but she isn't moving, and she's very, very thin. The bride must have frightened her terribly. I cannot get her to move and to come home with me. I will leave her for now. It is so good to see you. Finally, I reach the end. They haven't reached my home, and when I pass them and go around a few corners, I cannot see the bride anymore. Mother is still there. Mother is okay. It's okay. For now, it's okay. Don't worry about the bride, mother. I will hold them back. Sleep, wake up, dive into the wet and catch food. It is much easier to catch the crunchy bugs. They aren't fighting back as much. I don't know why. They just feel weaker and they have a sour taste. Climb out, eat, bring food to mother, then climb back up the tunnels, up the great shaft to the bride. When I get there, I see the bride hasn't grown much further, and I feel better. Still, I have to keep going until they leave my world forever. Before I start ripping them up, I freeze. A noise. I've never heard this noise before, so it frightens me. It sounds loud and heavy and... What is that? Oh no, 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 no! Please, no! The above has broken apart, smashed through. Something's up there. Strange creatures I've never seen before. They look terrifying. All fleshy and moving on two legs. Hard, colorful, shiny shells on their head and bodies lined with silvery strips that blind me. I have to get away, run away, get away. But I can't move. I'm too scared. The big pointy spiral is ripping apart the rock above me. The above. The world is broken and collapsing, and the creatures are pointing down at me. They are going to eat me. I whip around and scamper away. The hard clacking of my legs have never been so loud. The ground shivers again, a sound like the world exploding, and I am showering rocks and boulders. Faster, nearly there. I am nearly at the shaft, and then I can go home and rest with mother, and... A big heavy rock lands on my lower body. So heavy and with a crushing force. It hurts. It hurts so much. So much worse than the vines ever hurt me. Luckily, it rolls off me and I disappear into the tunnel as fast as I can. I am terrified. It hurts so bad, but I want to live. I don't want to get eaten. I don't remember how I got home. 6, maybe 8 or 9 of my back legs won't move. They won't listen to me. It doesn't matter though. They are broken and twisted, and my spine is crooked. I remember falling down the shaft, but I couldn't roll into a ball, and it hurt even more. I'm leaking. You still won't help me. Please, mother, it hurts. Stop it hurting. Sisters? Sleep. Yes, the sleep will make it go away. Sleep heals. Sleep. I do not wake up. No, it is something else that wakes me. Something that isn't me. I'm not sure what it is at first until I roll my joints and look at the door of my home. Not the bride, but the suggestion of it. It's near. I try to get up on my feet. Instead, I crash back down. That's right. My back legs are ruined. So I drag myself to the door and cut through membrane. The second I exit, I collapse from fright. The bride is here. It's right outside. Grown all the way down from the tunnel up. No. What did I do to them to deserve this? I can't remember a long time after that. Panic, rip, tear, scream. When I am back, I see that most of the bride is ripped up. I don't know if it's dead though, so I scoop up as much of it as I can and slide down the wet. I dive in, down as deep as I can go and dump the vines. I'm too weak, so it isn't very far into the wet where I dumped them. Everything hurts. I hurt. The water hurts. It burns. I climb back out of the wet, hard to breathe. My spiracles are blocked with pus and lifeblood. I'm so tired and I want to sleep forever. When I get home, I freeze again and start to cry out. There are echoes from up the tunnel, bad noises. The two-leg monsters are coming with their giant claw or tooth, and another rumble, a loud blast. They are closer than I thought. I can see dust falling from above. I can't let them. I won't let them. I won't let them take Mother. How to hide? How? I know. I move up the tunnel a bit and start secreting out of my neck glands. First, a membrane from side to side, up and down until the membrane blocks the tunnel. Then I do it again and again and again until it is so tough I can't slice through it. When my glands run out, I crawl around the membrane, licking it with all my tongue so it can start hardening. It's hard. I can only move with my front legs, but I do it anyway. When I am too tired to go on, the membrane is already looking and feeling stony, just like the walls of the tunnel. I still sense the bad noises, but I can't hear them, and I can't see the bride on the other side. We are safe now, Mother. She is still sleeping, so tired. I will sleep next to her. I think I slept for too long. At least the bride didn't wake me this time. Hungry, my body is pulsing and it's hot. My legs, my spine, swollen and stinking, smelling more like Mother. So hungry. I ache with the hunger. I have to go into the wet for food. I don't have a choice, so I go. I catch the crunchy bugs. They don't fight back. Maybe they're all sleeping, but they are limp and floppy. I dive further and find out why. It doesn't matter what I do. Everything, anything I do, the bride does not care. It has seeded again and overtaken the wet. It's bursting with the bride, and it's so much worse than seeing it through the wet. Split and bursting into my eyes. So bright I can still see it through my closed eyelids. I can feel them in the weather around me. Their hurt, their hate. It burns more than I've ever felt, even more than my legs and my spine. I nearly don't make it out. The hurting bride makes my limbs go numb and my eyes sting and blur, but I crawl out of the wet, clicking and whimpering, dragging my useless legs behind me. I choke on the food as I eat it. Useless, useless, useless. Bad noises, bad bride, 2 legs, giant teeth, giant mouth. I can't bear it. Inside, seal the membrane, go to mother, bring her the food I have called for her and leave some for my sisters. To mother, my sisters, just need to eat, to live, that is all. I never should have gone away from here, never should have climbed up. Nearly there, mother, nearly. I am woken up again and I know why. Before I even look, I know the bride is right outside. So much, so many I can see through the membrane. It's not fair. I don't have the strength to fight it now. Not anymore. There is no point. Even before the rock fell on me, I couldn't fight back. Not really. The bride is growing. I can see it growing in front of me. I trace the vines and they go back down to the wet. The wet is just a tangle of bride and vines now. My barrier in the other tunnel is still there, still protecting, but I can hear the bad noises, the 2-leg things. They know where I am and they're coming. Why does everyone hate me? It isn't fair. I am trapped, both sides. Walls, no walls, closing in, falling down. I just go back inside with mother. With the bride outside my door, I can see her, and I can see my sisters too. They've come back. I must not disturb them. They are sleeping, healing, yes. Still thin, still gooey, but healing. They are still. Wait, mother isn't healing. Why isn't it working? The sleep? She's so thin. And the color. Her skin is covered in patches of bad color and she hasn't eaten any of the food I brought her. I try to take care of her and clean her of my tongues, but the taste is awful. Pressure inside me comes back and pushes out of my feet in a gush of fluid and chewed up bugs. Mother. She doesn't move. I'm scared. Mother. Am I alone? No, stop it. Help mother. I have to. Without her, I will get hungry and sad. I try to help her. I try to put her head back on her body, but it keeps falling off and rolling away. I try to slide her scale tight and join her bones back together. Moist and brittle under my padded labs and smelling worse than ever before. Why won't you talk to me? Why? If you're hungry, then eat. Mother. Sisters, are you there? It feels like a long time before I can think again. Did I sleep? Am I awake now? It's hard to tell. I hear the noises, the bad noises, except they aren't bad anymore. They don't scare me. I just listen to them, wonder what's making them and where the 2-leg creatures came from. They broke through the above, but from where? Itchy, tail, legs, spine, itchy and pulsing and swelling so much they're going to burst. Maybe the 2 legs already found me and are eating me. I can't tell. No, wait. There are curly 100 black bugs and spiders nibbling at my legs. I feed them, but don't see anything. Do I see? I don't know what I see. The bright, the dark. I don't understand the difference anymore. My thinking, thoughts, outside of me. Still mine, but not in me. There is one that is not mine. I hear it, or think it. The dark is all she has ever known. I call out because it could be Mother. It couldn't be anyone else but Mother. I can't see her. The bed sounds are louder. I can't see the bride, but I know it's growing over me now. Growing into me, into my spores and spiracles. Can't breathe. Hurts. The child was never meant to see the light, but perhaps this was inevitable. She blames herself. I did. Not now. At least I don't have to fight anymore. I can't. There is nothing I can do now, and that feels good. The bride can have everything if it wants. Let go, little one. The itching won't stop. I thought I would never see it again, but I see one more thing. I see it sharp and focused, lying on the ground in front of me. It is the toy, the gift I brought back from Mother. Round and hard, pale and cracked. I stare and blink into its 1, 2 empty sockets, and they look back into every one of my eyes. It's a face. Mother's. Mine. A blanket of warm, dark and quiet wraps around me, and the itching is gone, but I keep staring into the face and its empty eyes, lying there next to me. I think it's still missing a piece. Like me. My eyes start to close one by one, and in my head I smile, because I am not alone. Life Row was the last home I had in dry land. Now I'm locked in a cell equally as grey and bare. The only difference is I'm below the surface of the Pacific in a lonely steel capsule. They lured me in with a chance at reducing my sentence by volunteering as a test subject for the Hadal Anomaly project. Cryptic, right? I won't detail the reasons for my imprisonment, because from what I've been seeing and hearing, it doesn't matter anymore. The rest of the world may as well not exist. We disembarked, best part of a month ago? It's guesswork, but I think we're somewhere off the coast to Mexico, near the Galapagos Islands maybe. What I do know is we're now deep enough for the words day and night to lose all meaning. There's not much to look at through the dinner plate porthole in my cell. Seems like a pointless investment if you ask me. The things I've made out from eavesdropping through the tiny gap in the doorframe are far, far more interesting. From muted fragments of conversation, here's what I know. The Hadal Anomaly, this project's namesake, is a vacuum close to the Pacific seabed. It's spherical, just under a kilometer wide, with no rational justification for its existence. No water, air, sand, an empty region of space and nothing more. Feels like we're still moving, still descending. I don't know how long it will be until we arrive, hopefully a while. Still, I'm noticing some changes. There is a low hum coming from somewhere, and it's gotten louder as time goes on. Thank God I have a notepad. If I didn't have an outlet for my thoughts right now, I might lose it. Okay, what the hell? I thought this manner of dark was basically impenetrable, but now there's a light. It's not part of the sub, no. A bright spot, like a lone star suspended in the night sky. It's pink, a sort of rose color and motionless, aside from the way it's pulsing seemingly at random. I think it's what's making the humming. When it swells, so does the humming. I can see the border of this vacuum too. It's like looking into a glass sphere, the inside perfect and unblemished. I'm starting to regret taking them up on this offer. Something's telling me life in jail would be a paradise or whatever they plan to do with me. A few minutes ago, I watched a test subject get sent out in some kind of pressure suit, straight towards the light. When they passed into the vacuum, the suit just disintegrated, as if dipped into some obscenely powerful acid, corroded away into nothing. Yet, whichever poor soul was chosen for this test run is somehow unharmed. I mean, she's floating naked, but I don't think she's dead. Her skin looks alive and she'll twitch and convulse at random. Sometimes it even looks like she's trying to speak. Scream maybe, but no one can hear her. Any comms equipment they loaded with her is gone, rotted away into less than dust. A few minutes was all I could stand watching her float toward the light before slumping down beneath the porthole. I don't know how long I sat like that. At some point I dozed off, but the sub-shuddering brought me back with a miss the last step kind of feeling. A pale pink circle projected from the portal onto the bulwark door told me enough. No need to look outside. I think that was her passing into the light, for better or worse. Probably worse. There's gotta be an escape to this. Can a pen do lethal damage to a corrorated artery? Maybe, I'll find out. Subject 006 is the next lab rat they're picking. Subject 006 is me. The urge to end it right now is tempting, before they can send me into something they haven't the first fucking clue about. I can't bring myself to do it though. If going into that thing puts you asleep, then maybe it'd be a better death. But I don't know that. The researchers don't know that. How could they? Or perhaps they do and think it's a mercy to leave me questioning. It isn't a mercy, it's torment. The keypad outside my door is beeping. There is no time left. Then again, what worth is there to anything I write in this journal? Maybe a part of me is hoping that someone reads this, stranger or otherwise, so at least they know a living person wrote this. Or I'm just writing my thoughts. Not everything needs a purpose, a deep meaning, or anything like that. Some things can just be. It's time. I'm up. Later, no one. It's obvious past this point I couldn't continue my journal. Even if I somehow brought it along, it would have disintegrated inside the anomaly. Researchers and sub-operators crowded me, chattering in a cubicle of voice. I didn't care to hear anything they had to say. Why should I? If I was going to be released out into the hail zone towards some undefined fault in reality, insider info would be as useful as a paper ore. The pressure suit was more like a cage than anything. Rigid joints prevented any movement, only serving to transport a fragile bag of meat for an inhospitable environment. It had a teeter latch on the back, yet another pointless addition to the whole thing. There was a cold rush as I hurtled out of the sub. Not from the water around me, but dread. A dread nothing on earth, nothing natural could instill. An endless thought loop cycled in my head, attempted rationalization for what was about to happen. None of them were sufficient or even close to the truth. Slowly, I drifted toward the vacuum. The gradual inching closer. It was agonizing. Then, the instant I passed the border, everything went black. But only for a moment. My eyes opened, and what I saw was not the deep sea, nor was it the bright light. The rapture incarnate, in every town, city, and village. I saw burning skyscrapers lighting up a starless night, underlined by the collective wail of humanity as they fled in absolute hysteria. A shape crested the city skyline, cloaked in an oily pall. Something utterly massive, a shell splitting into 9 spirals. The military tried their best, but the bullets did nothing and their missiles were whipped out of the sky by vast, mismatched limbs. Any ill-conceived providence was brushed aside as the shell colossus wiped up men, women, and children alike, shoveling countless people into its pulsating, toothed spincer. Every crushed bone, snapped joint, torn limb I heard. Screams and the wail snuffed out. Violent creatures spewed from its fleshy openings, galloping and squirming through the streets, eviscerating anyone and everyone, Some blocking smoke from vesicle jaws, others spraying caustic fluids to liquefy flesh. Again, my eyes opened to full awareness. I tried to howl in the horror and disgust of what I'd seen. Silence. It was only me, the emptiness, and the beaming light. Quickly as I had awakened, I was plunged into another vision. This time, an underwater landscape greeted me. It was calm, rich in all manner of life. Some big, some small, some hard and some soft. The only violence was necessary predation. But what caught my mind's eye were a group of oddly humanoid creatures with coiling limbs tightened into familiar shapes, darting around with spear-like weapons, some carrying skewered fish down to a sprawling structure in the seabed. There was no time for peace or comfort. Once more the dream fell into oblivion, and I was met feet away from the blinding light. It shone with colors that shouldn't be, dancing across my vision, drawing me into its gravity. One last time, I blacked out. There was nothing to see, only a soft and distant voice. Enter the source, the zenith. A deep, rattling horn sounded from every conceivable direction, and then I was falling. Upon opening my clenched eyelids, I saw that place. Words can never do it justice, but I'll try my best. Encircling me, arcs of black fog on a galactic scale fed down to something beneath. I looked down, and the only thing I could think was every single star in the universe squeezed together into one immense mass of light and heat. It beamed with those same impossible colors, spinning around me in coronas the size of Saturn's rings. Soon, the light was all I could see, a perfect anti-void. I couldn't see, but I felt it. My body felt like it was expanding, stretching, tearing, mending, changing. And then finally it was dark again, cold. I looked around, darkness punctuated by a single rose of light, glinting off a curved metal object I recognized. As I approached, my arms came into view, lit up in violent hues. Well, they weren't arms, not really. Two long bundles of wiry tentacles pushed me forward. Yet, when I stopped to look at them, they twisted and coiled into shapes I recognized. Arms and hands. Effortlessly, I soared through the brine to the submarine's bow, stopping at its glass dome and staring in. The very same scientists and crewmates who shoved me into the unknown milled around inside. One by one, they noticed me, freezing in a sort of horrified awe. I think I smiled, but I don't know what my face looks like now. Before leaving, I circled the sub and found a portal to my holding cell. Inside, a grey square sat skewed on a sturdy table. My new appendages slithered across the glass, smothering it in seconds and pulling with tiny suction cups. With little effort on my part, the window cracked and shattered, and I had to brace to avoid being sucked through the checked glass teeth. Foot-thick reinforcements slammed down around the bulwark door, while red lights strobed around and sirens blared. In one fluid motion, I reached inside and grabbed a notepad, swaddling it tight in a nest of tendrils in hopes of saving the ink. All around me, the midnight black lit up with tens, no, hundreds more rogue stars. A sprawling alien firmament. After rocketing up to the surface and following the sun to the east, I washed up on a sandy ridge, restraining a small lagoon. It was dusk, which worked in my favor to mask the features of my new body. The beach fed into a small town. After the short trek, my skin already felt dry and irritated. Maybe skin isn't the right word. Membrane, scales, it's not something I care to dwell on. Now, after following home some unfortunate late-night walker, I'm sitting in their house, typing on an old laptop with their unconscious body on the floor. Internet's spotty, but I only need to make one post. I'm going back as soon as this is finished, to bathe beneath the moonlit ripples of crushing depths, places warm and blue, others frozen and grey. Places I belong now all the same. Make what you will of this. I may have filled in some parts of the journal where the inks run, but it's accurate enough. I think someone's coming. Something that was once a distant foresight, now a promise past due. Our society will burn. Cities racing to dying embers amongst ash and bone. Nightmares roaming every continent, slaughtering anyone or anything they see. But there's a salvation for all of us. Somehow, I know the lights will multiply and rise to the surface. Go to them. Let them take you. If not, I'll bring you along myself. Become like me and survive what's coming. Because what's coming is coming soon. And before long, you'll be out of time to save yourselves. I never liked going to my Aunt Paola's house. Honestly, I never liked her either. She's a creepy, Bible-thumping Jesus fanatic, and she'd always circle over me like a vulture. But none of that creeped me out like her house did. It was old, run down, and filled with weird religious art. Sure, there were the typical paintings of the Last Supper and Our Lady of Guadalupe. That's not what made my skin crawl. It was the statues. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what bothered me, but something wasn't right about them. They were littered all over the place, filling every corner, turning up in every direction you looked, and I swear they looked back. Giant, god-awful figures of saints and angels clogging the tiny house and turning it into a claustrophobic maze. I often wondered where my aunt had gotten the money for all the sculptures. In all other regards, it seemed as though she had taken a holy vow of poverty. Very little money was spent on herself or even her toddler son. My cousin Miguel was just as strange as his mother. They were so alike that I sometimes forgot that Aunt Paula had adopted him. It was the eyes that truly made them resemble one another. A haunted stare accompanied by an uncomfortable silence. The first time I babysat Miguel, he never fussed or cried the way normal babies do. It should have been a relief, but the entire time I squirmed as he watched me. My mother insisted there was no medical reason to blame for his disposition. Secretly I wondered if it came from being cooped up with my aunt who had never dated or married. After that evening, I passed all the babysitting opportunities to my younger sister. She didn't seem to mind. It probably would have continued on that way, if not for a school project that had my sister occupied at the neighbor's house right when my aunt insisted on going to Saturday Mass. There was nothing I could do to get out of it. My mom didn't care about my whining. She just leaned across the kitchen table and said, "Look, Marcos, I'm not asking, I'm telling." And that was the end of it. An hour later we were in the car driving to my aunt's house. Gradually clean swept sidewalks and picket fences gave way to the chain link and graffiti. Occasionally we'd pass a coffee house packed with hipsters milling around like poverty tourists on a safari. People like my aunt were the wildlife. Just as the sun began to set, we arrived at the house. My mom parked, I stepped out of the car and walked up 4 wooden stairs to my aunt's front door. As I reached out to ring the doorbell, the front door flung open. "Hola, Marcos," she said in a thick Mexican accent. Her dark eyes stared into mine. She was a small lady with shoulder-length black hair. She wore a white polo shirt and a navy blue skirt that resembled a schoolgirl's uniform. Her wrinkled brown skin reminded me of a dried-up riverbed. "Miguel is already asleep in his crib. Make sure you give him his bottle if he starts crying. I made 2 of them already. They're in the refrigerator. And make sure you don't put the TV too loud. Your mom and I will be back in an hour." "Okay, Tia Paola," I responded. She preferred when I called her Tia Paola because the word aunt was too American for her. She was an old-school Mexican lady that didn't believe in speaking English. She had no choice when it came to me because I didn't speak Spanish. That made her angry and it made me chuckle every time I reminded her of that. She stomped off towards the car as I waved my mom goodbye. I let out a sigh of disappointment as they drove off. "Here we go," I thought aloud as I closed the door and walked into the pitch-black house. I felt the wall for the light switch and flicked it on. Directly in front of me stood a 5-foot-tall statue of the Blessed Virgin. I jumped back and yelped. Maybe it was my imagination, but I thought I saw hate in the eyes of the otherwise serene face of the statue. It was ridiculous. Statues can't feel or hate anything at all. It's just plaster, I said under my breath as I warily backed towards the sofa. As I rummaged around the floor pillows for the remotes, I recalled that my aunt was too cheap to pay for cable. Maybe the bill would have eaten into her precious money statue. Still, that left 5 channels to choose from. 3 of those channels were network news, followed by Fox and some kind of Spanish public access. The pickings were slim. Luckily, Fox was showing an episode of The X-Files, and I had enough time to grab a snack while the commercials were on. Wandering toward the kitchen, I noticed crucifixes nailed above each doorway. Nope, nothing weird there, I muttered sarcastically. Inside the fridge, I found stacks of Tupperware, the 2 bottles for Miguel, and a cookie tin hiding toward the back. There was a 50% chance the tin held sewing supplies, especially since it was sitting on top of a Bible. Clearly, Aunt Paola was losing her mind. A spoon sat next to the Bible, so I used it to pry open the tin. Beans. Cold, smelly beans. My consolation prize was a bottle of water, which I grabbed just as I heard the show start in the living room. Hurrying back, I plopped down on the couch. My phone buzzed with a new text message. Apparently, my friends were off hanging out at the mall like normal teenagers, and the girls they were meeting had a friend who thought I was cute. Great, I was officially cursed. Instead of replying, I tossed my phone toward the other end of the couch so I could focus on the adventures of Mulder and Scully. The monster that they were investigating was a shape-shifting something or other that was behind a string of murders and several local legends. Of course, Mulder had to ask, what if the legends are true, while Scully rolled her eyes and scribbled on a clipboard. Halfway through the episodes, Scully was conducting an interview with a witness who just happened to be the monster in disguise. Tension was building, and just as it reached its peak, Miguel let out a blood-curdling scream down the hallway. I jumped up and ran down the hallway to Miguel's room. His bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open to find pitch darkness. With my body halfway into his room, I blindly fumbled for the light switch. I flicked it on and found Miguel standing up in his crib. Tears rolled down his cheeks and onto his light blue onesie. His podgy hands clasped the rail of the crib as he rocked his body back and forth. "What's wrong, Miguelito?" I asked, as if expecting a 2-year-old to respond. Quickly I remembered the bottles in the fridge and ran to grab one. I hustled back to his room and handed the bottle to him. He wouldn't take it and continued crying. Then I pressed a nibble of the bottle to his lips, but he refused to drink. Desperate, I looked around his room as if I would find a solution to his crib laying around somewhere. I jumped back and fried. I don't know how I missed it when I walked into the room, but in front of Miguel's closet stood a life-size concrete gargoyle. It hunched over as if ready to pounce on its prey. Sharp feathered wings sprouted out from its back. Its menacing face was dominated by a nose that protruded like a parrot's beak over thick lips formed into a feral grin. The bald, misshapen head was dwarfed by its muscular body, from which oversized hands and arms hung from below its bent knees. Although the feet it perched on resembled a chicken's talon, the overall effect was ape-like. I'd never seen anything like it, yet it had an ineffable quality that matched the rest of the sculptures in the house. Maybe that was why I didn't run away screaming. While watching the hideous gargoyle, I rubbed my cousin's back to soothe him. "Shh, shh, don't cry, Miguelito." He coughed and made himself gag from crying so hard. Through his sobbing and crying, I heard my phone ring from the living room. I dropped the bottle in Miguel's crib, picked him up and walked to the living room. Without looking at who was calling, I quickly answered the phone with my one free hand. "Hello?" I shouted over Miguel's cries. "Marcos, this is Tia Paola. Why is Miguel crying?" "I have no idea. I gave him his bottle and he wouldn't drink it. He doesn't stop crying." Mass ended early and we are on our way home. I told you not to put the TV so loud, Marcos, she shouted. Tia, maybe he's crying because of that ugly black statue you put into his room. That thing even scared me. Why would you have something like that in a baby's room? What black statue are you talking about, Marcos? I've never put anything like that in his room, she answered. Then, where did it come from? It was in front of his closet facing the crib, I shouted. She stayed silent for a moment, then whispered as if someone on my end of the line might overhear it. Listen to me carefully, Marcos. Get out of the house right now. Take Miguel and leave immediately. What? Her whispers turned into screams. Marcos, leave now. That statue you saw isn't a statue. Es un demonio. I slowly lowered my phone and attempted to translate her last words. Es un demonio, I whispered to myself. Prickles and goosebumps shot up my body once I realized what she said. Oh shit, she said it's a demon. I dropped my phone and stumbled. The back of my knees hit the couch. I could hear my mom and aunt screaming my name from the phone speaker. As I stepped forward to move towards the front door, Miguel's bedroom light suddenly turned off. Miguel stopped crying and squeezed my neck with his cold little arms. With his face pressed against mine, we focused our eyes on the black hallway. His bedroom door gently creaked open. I could feel Miguel's heartbeat galloping along with mine. From the darkness of the bedroom hallway, a low-pitched growl echoed into the living room. Miguel began to scream again. As I ran to the front door, all the lights in the house suddenly shut off. Heavy footsteps followed towards us. Something yanked both of my legs from under me and I fell onto my side. My head hit something hard, but through the dizziness and nausea, I held onto Miguel's torso with my good arm and struggled to my feet. We made maybe 2 or 3 steps towards the door when Miguel then was ripped out of my grasp. The last thing I remember was somebody screaming. It might have been me, I'm not sure. When I came to my senses, I was on a stretcher being loaded into an ambulance. A paramedic said I had a broken arm and a serious head concussion. I don't recall rambling about monsters or trying to get up, but when I woke up in the hospital, I was told that I had to be restrained to keep from hurting myself. Doctors and detectives quizzed me on what I could remember. I insisted that a monster disguised as a statue had attacked me and my cousin. They chalked it up to the blow to my head and told me that my cousin had been taken in the same home invasion that had resulted in my injuries. Someone with a clipboard gently explained to me that I had been watching a TV show about monsters and urban legends before I was attacked. The emotional and neurological trauma caused me to blend my fantasy with my memories of the crime. But what about the statues? I asked. Clearly, I was still confused. My aunt never had any statues, not of gargoyles or anything else. A nurse came in to put a shot of something in my IV. The last thoughts that drifted to my head were that maybe some urban legends are true. Maybe a demon can look like a statue, and maybe that house was crawling with them. I'm about 40 searches in on Google, yet I found nothing that can help, nor anyone who has been in a similar situation to this one. Some examples of my searches are: how to stop door from spinning, stop door glitching in house, prevent door from leading anywhere except the room behind, how do I flip my door back from inside out, and then all of the above with Reddit suffixed. Other than nobody seeming to have a clue, the other glaring issue is that I can't find any consistent way to describe, well, whatever the hell my kitchen door is doing at any given time. The first time it behaved in an on-door-like manner was last Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from the store and was hauling inside a few grocery bags on the brink of splitting open. I kicked the front door closed behind me and turned right to head into the kitchen. The door was closed, so I had to stop awkwardly and twist it in the crook of my arm. With a gentle shove, the door opened slightly. When I went to push it further, my elbow clipped something and I tumbled in a tangle of limbs and groceries. Now, my sight is near perfect and I have no issues with depth perception, Yet, when I looked around, I saw nothing I could have caught my arm on. I groaned into one palm and rested the other on the door, feeling the cool wood grain beneath my fingers. But when I looked up, I saw my fingers splayed across thin air. My hand was resting on nothing, and yet some invisible force stood in its way that felt like my kitchen door. I pushed forward on instinct, and the door, the real door, moved in tandem. Somehow, some way, the physical presence of the door was around 30 degrees behind where I saw it. Now paradoxically familiar with the impossible situation, I gave it a firmer push. There was no impact when I saw the door hit the wall, and the bang that sounded half a second later startled me. I expected the door to bounce back, but it stuck to the wall as if coated in superglue. Upon closer inspection, I saw that the door was in the wall. Well, it wasn't really in the wall as much as it was on the wall. About 2 inches of the door's outer ledge lay flat on the wall without any depth. It was like that part of the door transformed into a partially painted mural that connected seamlessly with the real kitchen door. It stayed like that, stuck for the rest of the day, wouldn't budge an inch. It wasn't something I could just shake off either. It was noon, so I wasn't tired, and the midday sun ensured no tricks of the light were at play. Bizarre as it was, my thoughts were elsewhere. It was Friday, and I planned to see my daughter Lila on the weekend, hopefully with little interaction with my ex-wife, Sadie. I couldn't forget about it, but shoved it aside nonetheless for more important thoughts. When I trudged into the kitchen on Saturday morning, the door was normal. While the kettle boiled, I leaned on the counter with my hands pressed onto the sides of my face. I imagined making a goofy expression, one that would make Lila burst out laughing and smile at the thought. I poured a coffee, grabbed a banana from the fruit bowl, and turned to head over to the living room. I'd heard nothing to indicate the kitchen door had closed, but there it sat with its dull white panels. I didn't remember closing it on the way in. Bear in mind, I'd only just gotten my coffee, yet to take a sip. The way the knob turned in my hand, however, couldn't be rationalized as morning brain. The wood grain spiraled around the handle in a psychedelic whirlpool, pulling the door surface into a twisting point behind the doorknob. Lovecraft was right in thinking that witnessing the unwitnessable cleaves at the fortitude of the mind. I mean, I'm not a rational fanatic as his protagonist tended to be, but the way the door warped and twisted in on itself over and over again would make anyone question their own fundamental beliefs. Inside turned outside, then became outside, and then neither all at once. I was awestruck and terrified in equal measure. I knew a door couldn't have ill will, nor pose any considerable threat, but when faced with such a violation of the expected, the brain kind of short-circuits. Some reflex in my body kicked my leg out in front of me, and shocked at the involuntary motion, I squeezed my eyelid shut. The sole of my slipper met resistance, which lessened, then disappeared entirely. When I opened my eyes, the door was back to normal, swung open into the hallway beyond. Other than being inverted, it was back to being a plain old door. Not entirely normal, but I could live with it if it meant no more of the morphing impossibility. Any thoughts or theories regarding my kitchen door were stored for later in the recesses of my mind, as I pulled out the driveway to go and pick up Lila. Sadie waited with her on the porch, and I could see her impatience from a mile away, arms crossed, dressing gown tied tightly around her waist. My brakes squealed before settling in park at the end of the driveway, at which point Sadie gave Lila a gentle nudge, setting her into a sprint toward my car. That grin she always had plastered on her face made everything else fall away, if only briefly. Lila's smile faltered after running straight into the car door, failing to predict when to slow down. I almost exploded in laughter, but my face fell back a step seeing Sadie over Lila's shoulder, lips pursed and eyebrows raised in an unamused expression. I popped the passenger side lock and Lila hopped inside with unbridled enthusiasm. "Dad, Mommy wouldn't let me have hot chocolate." "Is that so?" I asked, leaning over to look past her and back to the porch. "I still want one. Can I have one at your house? Please, Dad." Well, behave yourself and we'll wait and see. She only just made it the 15 minutes home without messing about too much. I was gonna make her a hot chocolate regardless, but it's easier to drive without your 8-year-old getting rowdy. The second I switched the car off, Leela was out of her seat like lightning. Seriously, before I even had time to pull out the key from the ignition. She looked back at me from the front door with an urgency above all, so I got out of the car and headed down the paved slabs to my house. The door unlocked with a click. Leela burst through and into the house, curving around and barreling into the kitchen. I paused with one foot through the doorway and patted my pockets. "Hey baby, I'm just going to grab my phone from the car. Don't break anything, okay?" No response. I called out again, louder this time, and was met with nothing but silence. I hadn't been that concerned about the kitchen door, but the knowledge of what I'd seen combined with Leela's refusal or inability to reply filled me with a riveting dread. I whirled around and stepped through the front door, peering around it toward the kitchen. The closed door to the kitchen looked normal. Wait, I didn't hear it close. Leela definitely ran into the kitchen, and she obviously couldn't have done it without the door being open. I leapt toward the shining doorknob, grasping and twisting it while pushing at the same time. The door flew open, but what I saw was not my kitchen. Behind was a cupboard-side space with another door on the wall, shut like the one I just opened. "Leela?" Nothing. "Leela!" This time I swore I heard just the faintest echo of a voice with a pitch matching my daughter's. I plunged into parental panic mode and opened the second door. What was behind it? Another door. Beads of sweat started to form on my face as I opened door after door after door after door. Every time there was another knob to turn. In my state of terrified frustration, I'd failed to look behind me after passing through the first door. And when this thought rose to the surface of my mind like a bloated and waterlogged corpse, I twisted my head over my shoulder to see a plain, deep blue wall matching the rest of the claustrophobic space. With no other choice, I pressed onward, flinging open every door in my way. The changes were so gradual as to imperceptible. However, after about 50 open doors I saw it. A deep, perfectly straight scratch mark in the door. At the time, it didn't really mean anything, but the further I went on, the more of these engravings appeared. First, they formed a pentagon, and then from each corner of the pentagon formed unfamiliar runic shapes. It's still on my kitchen door as I write this, so I drew a sketch so you can see for yourselves. I don't have the slightest inkling as to what it means or what language it's composed in, if it's indeed a language at all. All I know is that this symbol, this sigil, formed a connection from my kitchen door to somewhere else, somewhere outside. I threw my hands out to the wall, when behind what I found was the penultimate door stood Leela. She faced away from me, out through the final door which stood wide open, hanging on its hinges above a cosmic precipice. Vast silver beams reached down from the heavens, piercing an endless ocean of dark fog at depths far too great to ever comprehend. And above that ocean sat a ball of light so bright and dense it wrapped around the fabric of space around it, beaming with colors foreign to the reality I knew. Streams of the dark fog sprouted up in arcs, pulled and siphoned into the blinding glare of a million stars. Leela's small frame shivered against my own trembling body. As much as I wanted to whisk her up into my arms and run, my brain refused to make any rational decisions when faced with this unearthly place. I might have toppled straight into the expanse from all alone if it weren't for a harsh cracking noise sounding in close proximity. I clasped my hands on Leela's shoulders instinctively, drawing her back from the edge, and my rising gaze met with something that returned 100 more. A being that looked like it was made from polished slate stood on a chaotic lattice of dark eyes, frozen in nebulous wisps, indicating it was the same dark fog as beneath. The creature had a head resembling a pine cone, each glistening plate unfolded to reveal far too many eyes to be of use for any living thing. So fixated was I on its spiteful glare, I hadn't noticed dozens of plates peeling back from its body to unveil widening, fleshy limbs ending in 3 digits. In one it held a withered shard of black eyes, quivering in a way that betrayed trembling excitement. It dropped the shard and let out a piercing wail, so harsh it was as if a shotgun had just been fired right beside me. At its call, my attention was drawn to the shifting bodies behind it. All around, creatures I'd rather not recall in writing converged in a mass exodus toward the doorway where we stood. Hastily as they began, they stopped and looked up. The gargantuan metal beams groaned and slowly began to move. The beams had a bizarre, almost ornamental design to them, and as they moved and undulated among the webs of black eyes, I saw what they really were. Feathers. Gleaming, silver feathers fluttering in an absent breeze, and as they spread and lowered, their owner came into view. Concentric rings of light and shadow, shrinking toward a singularity where the feathers converged. The head was both bright like the stars, yet black like the void encompassing the very firmament. As it descended, the swarm of creatures rose in babbling, screeches and hisses and sounds I can't even begin to describe. Speech or simple bestial vocalizations, I don't know. These things were terrified by whatever was descending from above, and it was this revelation that charged my body with adrenaline. I stepped in front of Leela and grabbed the doorknob, but the exposed muscle finger of the python had wrapped around the door. For the first time, I heard words I could understand in a voice that sounded like wind howling down a chimney.
Do not close that door. We have all been imprisoned here, beyond what is far too long.
Let go! I screamed, tugging hysterically at the doorknob.
You have seen Olokakenai, and it has seen you. You are both its prisoners now. But if you open this door, if you let us come with you...
The creature was cut off as a vast, chromic feather whipped down from above, lodging its sharp spine into the creature's head and violently yanking it up into the heavens. I slammed the door shut with all my might, and when I turned around, we were inexplicably in my downstairs hallway. Leela was sitting on the floor, bawling her eyes out. I would have joined her, but the shock of it forbade any such emotional response. I sat down and pulled her close, shushing her with reassurances. She buried her face in my chest, and her muffled sobs sent a wave of pain through my heart. Daring a glance up the door, I saw the sigil remained, carved into the wood with straggling flakes of white paint hanging onto its edges. I tried to cheer up Leela, but after the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by catatonic dread. Sadie was furious when she arrived on Sunday evening, seeing the state that Leela was in. I tried to explain, Leela did too, but she wasn't having it, leaving me with only an icy glare in an empty house. I haven't set foot in the kitchen since. Call me a coward, I don't care. The shrieking clashes from behind the door, speaking of feathers that reach to eternity. I'd rather swing by the closest burger joint or eat straight out of the grocery bag every day than ever touch that doorknob. I swear, I'm not a bad person. Though it might be a good idea to call someone up for a door replacement. Some local handyman. I just hope they don't find it too weird when I watch them through the window, waiting in morbid trepidation for the moment they try the door and see what's on the other side. I hope to see just my plain old kitchen, but if not, maybe Olokakenai is better with faces. It had been 6 months since the accident. I remember because Elizabeth was helping me sign my name in our daughter Jenny's birthday card. Slowly, she guided my hand, helping me create some legible signature rather than the scribbles of a child in kindergarten, the best that I was able to manage with such little practice. It seems that when one loses a limb, it's quite likely to be the dominant one. For me, it was the right. I was concentrating on my writing, trying not to make her do too much of the work, when I felt it. I hadn't noticed the phantom feeling of my elbow resting on the table beside me. By this point, I had almost gotten used to it, although the pain would sometimes still wake me. It was brief, but enough to startle me and cause my hand, still holding the pen, to jump and effectively turn my name into scribbles despite my wife's best efforts. It was gentle but cold, too cold. Less like ice cream and more like the feeling of a deep cut, when the insides of a body part are suddenly exposed to the outside elements that they were never supposed to meet. When Elizabeth asked, I shrugged it off, telling her it was an unexpected pain in the hand that was convinced was clenched, even though it didn't exist. At the moment, I almost believed that that was happening myself. The next time it woke me, I was asleep on my stomach with my phantom arm dangling off the bed. I've slept like that as long as I can remember, and when I first felt it, I thought that my hand had fallen asleep and causing the pins and needles sensation that I had often felt. When I tried to open and close my hands, I awoke, remembering in a sleepy haze that I didn't have a hand to open, yet the cold feeling remained. This time it stayed a while, and I couldn't make out the distinct feeling of fingers on my skin. I tried to shake my hand, but I couldn't. I pushed down with my left hand and shifted to roll over onto my back, yet the feeling remained, still as defined, and I wondered how long this invisible hand had held me. I shook my wife awake and explained, but she was convinced that it was simply a part of the process. She held me and talked to me in her cooing, comforting voice until, one by one, the fingers lifted, releasing me from the torture of the cold. Feeling it reminded me of the accident. There was a blizzard and Elizabeth was driving. As a truck approached, the car slid. She tried like hell to control it, but it seemed to have a mind of its own. I grabbed the wheel, spinning the car until it came to a stop. Then the truck hit us. My arm was mostly severed at the time of the impact, but my wife and daughter were fine. The feeling of blood escaping you chills you to the bone, and that was exactly what I was feeling while in this creature's grasp. For months it happened with no warning or reason. The doctor said it was just a phantom limb, that it was to be expected. No one understood that something was wrong. Sometimes it would last days at a time, and those were the days when I would stay in bed, watching TV, trying not to focus on the hand around my wrist, trying not to think of the thing that was holding me. Sometimes its grip would loosen, only to tighten again, as if the hand that didn't exist was sore from holding my hand that didn't exist for so long. Then, one day, it stopped. For a month or so, nothing happened at all. I had gone from living with an unknown entity at my side every day to finally being free. We lived it up during that time. We went everywhere, from the Grand Canyon to Disney World. It had been forever since we had the opportunity to spend time as a family again, and we enjoyed every moment that we had, grateful to have suffered only a small loss to our family. We had opened the cafe again, and my wife was doing what she loved. My daughter and I were at the cafe. It was closing time. She and I sat at a table outside while Elizabeth closed the register, chatting about the upcoming middle school dance. My wife joined us and locked the doors. "Wanna come with me?" she asked, patting the bag of money in her hand awaiting deposit at the bank across the street. Jenny jumped up eager, no doubt to get one of the suckers from the candy dish that the bank kept at the counter. "I'll warm up the truck," I said, fishing my keys from my pocket. My wife nodded in approval and walked me to the truck, kissing me on the cheek through the window after I entered and again on the glass after I rolled it up. They headed down the length of the truck and I turned to check the mirror when I saw it. A truck barreling down the road heading straight for my wife and daughter. I screamed her name and threw the door open when the hand that wasn't there was suddenly jerked to the opposing side of the truck, holding me in place as I kicked and screamed. The kiss on the glass window was the last I ever got, and the hand never let go again. When I was younger, I was one who indulged in music, parties, and various intoxicating substances that would enhance those experiences. I count myself among the many who allowed their hedonism to run wild with enthusiasm. It came then as no surprise that I found myself attending festivals with a group of friends who, at the time, shared the same reckless mindset as me. For the record, and I say this without pride, I'm experienced in drug taking. While I don't particularly regret it, there was one experience that halted my drug use altogether. At the time, my fellow partygoers scoffed at this decision, since I didn't see any worth trying to explain to them what had happened. They would most likely have chalked it all up to substance-induced hallucination. I've had such hallucinations in the past, which tend to be the result of sleep deprivation and frequent redosing. I can safely say that none of them compare to the raw reality of this experience. It was the start of summer, and my friend Rachel had informed me that a group of them were heading over to an EDM festival a couple of states over. I'll refrain from divulging the location, as I feel I have already revealed too much by specifying my home country, but I was quick to take up the invitation. Hastily, I booked the ticket from the third batch release and began making preparations for the trip. It was a 3-day weekend festival, so tents and other supplies were required. Of course, I was readily prepared with all the required equipment, the festival most certainly not being my first. I'll spare you the long car journey to the location, but we could barely contain ourselves. With me were my buddies Chris, Robbie, and of course, Rachel. We hadn't been to this one before, and we vigorously discussed many topics, including how we were going to smuggle our pills and powders. I myself opted to bring MDMA powder and a few LSD blotters, planning to candy flip for the duration. I stuck to the ever-true ballsing method, which is exactly as it sounds, stuffing your baggies into your boxers before going through security. For people like us, the place was pretty much nirvana. It was set up in a rural area, bordering hilly woodland on one side. At least a dozen enormous festival tents were set up in a semicircular fashion, all playing EDM, but with different artists in the lineup. Paradise at the time. The first day went by in a blur. I was quick to dose up on MDMA, which kept me dancing through 8 hours of bliss. I don't recommend redosing, but damn if it isn't hard to avoid when everyone around you is doing just that. Peer pressure at its finest. We had joined with another group of like-minded individuals by the end of the day, and we decided we'd camp together. Robbie had the wonderful idea to have a campfire, but with the rules and regulations, we would have to go somewhere a little more removed. We decided to pack up our tents and move over into the woods that bordered the property. I was skeptical at first, but we came across a really nice spot at the top of a hill, from which the terrain descended and gave us a clear view of the treetops across the forest. Pretty much a perfect spot to watch the fiery sunset commonly associated with summer evenings, whilst also being out of eye and earshot from any uptight security personnel. After setting our tents up, drinking began without hesitation. The sun was getting low, and all in all I felt great, despite the onset of a calm down headed my way. We were able to gather up twigs and sticks fairly quickly being in a forest, and use spent beer packaging to get the fire going. "Hey, wanna bump?" Chris said, who I sat next to on a fallen log near the campfire. He offered a bag of shady powder, which I immediately recognized as ketamine. How could I have refused? It was such a perfect moment, I couldn't put down a little dissociation. "You even have to ask?" A wide grin grew on his face, and he pulled out his car keys to scoop the powder. He sniffed a generous heap of the stuff before handing it to me. I crushed the bag a little, something Chris had forgotten to do beforehand, then took out a miniature snow-covered mountain and practically inhaled it. I tasted the drip a little, but it wasn't so bad in comparison to what I'd been consuming earlier in the day. I felt it immediately. "Whoa, holy shit, dude. Feels like something they tranquilize a fucking rhino with," I said, words already becoming jumbled and merged together. "I know, right? Didn't even open it earlier, been saving it for now." Robbie, eagle-eyed for intoxicants, practically teleported onto the log next to Chris. Probably just a side effect of the drug, but his sudden manifestation caused me and Chris to erupt in laughter. Robbie acted jokingly offended at this. Didn't know there was an isomer that made you turn into an asshole, he chuckled. Yeah, it's called dickhead, I mean, Chris said, barely containing his giggles. Well, I'm feeling a little too respectful right now. Mind sharing? Of course, replied Chris, passing the paraphernalia to Robbie. Just then, a different feeling swept over me. It wasn't a feeling of nausea or anxiety, but it was like the late day sunlight was coming in pulses. Like I could feel the rays, as if they had weight and substance to them, increasing and decreasing in intensity as they swept across my face. I'd never felt anything like it from this type of drug before, so at the time I thought it was just a combination of whatever other chemicals were coursing through my veins in the moment. Tripping out, as one might call it. I chose to dismiss it and continue partying. Someone from the other group had brought out their speaker, a heavy and chunky thing that blasted bass into our bones. With the others dancing about the camp, I opted that one final redose of MDMA couldn't hurt. I'm not sure how long I flailed about in joy for, but when I went to sit down on the log for a breather, the horizon was already burning with a deep orange. Need a cold one? Asked Robbie, who'd somehow pulled off the same teleportation trick from earlier. Whoa, shit dude, you got me again. Just one of my natural skills. You want one or not? Yeah, crack me one. I gasped, the exhaustion from the day finally catching up to me. Robbie opened the can and handed it to me, though it wasn't as cold as he'd promised. We sat there chatting for a while, gazing over the flittering leaves below, which reflected the dusk light. It felt serene, and I knew the money spent was not wasted. I became distracted at some point by a barely audible sound somewhere off in the distance. Again, I thought nothing of it. I wasn't a stranger to the hallucinations brought on after a heavy drug use, and I'd seen much worse. But the sound wasn't diminishing after some time, so I strained my ears to see if I could make out anything in particular. A light breeze had picked up, which made it more difficult, but after a short while I could definitely make something out. Machinery. That was the first word that came to my mind in an attempt to describe what I was hearing. The heavy clanking and whirring of fuel-powered mechanism operating on a building site. I didn't even notice Robbie's absence at this point until I looked over and saw there were only a few of us outside now, two making up messily, and Chris and Robbie still dancing. I sat and listened for a few minutes. I could swear that the sounds were getting closer, but they were still too distant to be certain. I checked the time, then became a little confused. 10 p.m. I glanced back up to the sky. The sun hadn't even touched the horizon yet, but the sky around had definitely become darker, with stars becoming apparent. A thought rose in my mind. This shit has me tripping. This was absolutely true, but the whole situation just seemed wrong in some way. At that moment, I shifted my gaze downwards to see Rachel standing below on the slope of the hill, facing away from the camp. Squinting in confusion, I called out, "Hey Rach, that you? What are you doing down there?" There was no response, not even a flicker of movement to suggest she'd registered my call. I grew concerned, thinking she'd taken too much, and I heaved myself up off the log to go and help her back up the hill. Rachel was standing with the strangest posture. Her shoulders were slumped so low it was like they had been dislocated, and her head lolled backwards. I picked up the pace a bit, growing more worried at her condition, when in all my carelessness I caught my foot on a root protruding from the dirt. I tripped head over heels, almost comically, and rolled down to the bottom of the hill in a tumble of dust and twigs. Luckily, it wasn't too high or steep, but it was far enough that upon looking back up, the fire lot was but a faint orange haze which leaked over the brim of the hill. I was too shaken to realize at first, but after observing my surroundings, I could see that Rachel was nowhere to be found. Surely she wasn't so fucked up as to not notice the mess that I was rolling right past her. But then, where was she? No one stood above me on the slope, and I couldn't see anyone else around me. I realized then that this was one of those stupid calm-down hallucinations. I was pissed, seeing my white trainers now coated in a fine layer of brown dust along with the rest of my clothing. Still, even with the realization, I found little comfort sitting on my ass, alone in a quickly darkening forest. I picked myself up off the ground and dusted my body down, but before turning to make my way back to camp, something caught my eye. The trees now blocked much of the sky, but the sun was still there, seemingly in the exact same place as earlier. From somewhere beyond the tree line above, there were these lines reaching out towards the sun. Very thin and barely visible, but they became more apparent the longer I stared. They moved in the most peculiar way, like hanging cables or tubes under the influence of gravity, swaying in curved arcs and terminating at the sun's edge. I wasn't so quick to credit this to some crazy visuals, however. I looked on in curiosity as more and more of these tubes began attaching themselves to the sun. The sun, which was brighter now? It was a dim orange previously, as sunsets tend to be, but now it looked more like it would during dawn, almost dazzlingly bright. I thought it had taken on a faint bluish hue, but with the drugs messing with my visual processing, I didn't dwell on that idea long. I willed myself to turn away and head back up the hill. My friends were probably worried with me gone, though they could equally have been completely unaware of my disappearance. I crawled back over the top to see only Chris and Robbie sitting near the dimming campfire. I fell on my knee and snapped a twig, leading Chris to look over at the noise. He visibly jumped when he saw me, then fell back into confusion as he glanced between me and Robbie, waiting for someone to speak.
What?
I shouted over, unsure of what had them in such bewilderment. The hell, man, stop fucking around. I thought you were some homeless dude or something, said Chris, letting out a sigh of relief after understanding the situation. What are you talking about? I went down there to get Rachel. She was... Wait, where's Rachel? She went to bed like 20 minutes ago, and you turned in like an hour ago, said Robbie. What? Robbie, I've been down in the forest for, I checked my watch, 12 a.m. 2 hours? Chris and Robbie didn't reply, instead looking between each other with a tinge of fear. Without a word, Chris stood and walked over to my tent, which upon opening he found to be empty. What the fuck? We both saw you go into your tent and zip it up, Chris exclaimed, worry evident in his tone. Man, I think we're all just really fucked up, I laughed dry of humor. They grunted in agreement, but I couldn't help but to think of what Chris had just said. Had they both hallucinated my likeness at the same time? Hey Del, you alright? You're sweating buckets, asked Robbie, and he hurled a bottle of water in my direction. You haven't forgotten about hydration, have ya? Now that he said it, I did feel strangely hot. I grabbed the bottle and downed it in a few seconds before I stood back up and walked over to the communal log bench. We didn't talk much after that, but instead hit Robbie's bunk for a few times to calm the nerves. Stupidly, it hadn't occurred to me at the time to ask if they also saw what I saw. I was simply too enamored by the situation. Both of them went to bed after, but I told them I wanted to sit outside a bit longer to relax. The relaxation didn't come though. To my dismay, the sun still hadn't set, refusing to budge from its perch above the horizon, and I could again hear those mechanical sounds from earlier echoing across the valley. There was no doubt this time, they were louder, clearer, which logically meant whatever was producing the sounds had moved closer. I was still under the impression of some grand hallucination when I heard a voice. No, that doesn't do it justice. I couldn't make out any words, but I somehow knew inherently that I had heard a voice amongst the distant clanging. Not as a separate entity, but as if the industrial soundscape was synchronizing itself in such a way that a combined din formed a low, metallic voice. Again, no words were apparent, instead a disordered mumbling that rang in between my ears. I noticed then the most bizarre sight yet. Despite the obvious abnormality of the pale sun hanging in the dead of night, I look closer to see these faint lines drifting on its surface, forming an array of patterns which were slightly dimmer than the rest of the sun. Focusing more intensely now, it was… how do I even describe it? I tripped countless times before, but it looked nothing like the colorful swirling visuals I was used to. It was like I was looking at an enormous, infinitely complex fractal unfolding and writhing in patterns of brighter and dimmer light. The longer I stared, the further the noises synchronized themselves, building until I undoubtedly heard the words.
This one.
It sounded so articulated, there was no way my mind just had conjured it up all from the random combination of sounds. It came in waves, like an underlying tinnitus wavering in intensity in such a way to form those exact words. The sky was now a black ocean dotted with its stars, heavily contrasting the intense, cold ball of light I saw before me. The heat was clearly noticeable now, as I found myself wiping sweat out of my eyes to continue looking. I made the decision to smoke some more weed and drink some more beer, in hopes I could knock myself out and go to sleep. This was all getting too weird, even for a partying vet like myself. I packed a bowl and took a long, slow draw. As much as I didn't want to look, my eyes were magnetized to the concerning sight before me. The squirming lines were wider now and much, much dimmer, more of a dark gray than anything. I rushed down a few beers, and halfway through my third, a loud clank made me jump and drop the can to the ground, furrowing my brow as if to ask the world around me to just stop whatever it was doing. I looked up one last time to see the pattern had ceased all movement and were now almost black. To my horror, they began to move again. No, the lines remained motionless, but the darkness within was writhing and started to fall. Swathes of tiny black shapes were pouring out of the sun right before my eyes, down into the trees below. At this point in my drug-induced illusion, my faith in the fact that this was a hallucination was dwindling. They kept pouring out until I could see the trees in the distance starting to shudder, leaves dancing about like a great stampede of something were shaking them. I didn't have the conviction to control myself anymore, and I started hyperventilating. The swaying treetops were getting closer, and the faint, horrible chittering noise became apparent. Like how I imagined insects would sound if they were capable of laughter. The tree's movement must have been less than half a mile away now. I was paralyzed. Whether I was now in a full-fledged delirium or not wasn't my concern at the time. My eyes did not seem to betray me otherwise. Whatever were moving through the trees below were moving fast, and within 20 seconds they were within full earshot. The sounds coming from the darkness became unbearable, like nails scraping my eardrums, and then… nothing. Movement ceased and silence fell. The fire still flickered dimly, preventing my eyes from adjusting to the swirling darkness weaving throughout the tree trunks downhill, and the crackling of the embers disturbed the thick, heavy silence preempting the camp. Suddenly, the sound of a twig snapping somewhere to my left broke my petrified state, and my head snapped to the direction that it came from. Rachel stood at the edge of the fire's illumination. No, calling that thing Rachel would be an insult to her very existence. It looked like something with no knowledge of human physiology had attempted to rebuild her using individual body parts, its limbs constantly shifting and readjusting themselves in a fluid manner, like it was trying to correct itself. I took a step forward, jolting me off the log and onto my back. Rolling backwards, I pushed myself back off the ground, but it had not moved further. Instead, it opened its mouth, or mouths. I couldn't tell how many it had at one time, constantly splitting and merging, combining and creating new holes. I couldn't see anything inside, just darkness. It began emitting these vile clicking and ringing noises which rose and fell, never finding a tone to settle on. And just like the sounds before, they started to synchronize into something semi-coherent. Whatever this was didn't seem to be able to copy Rachel's voice. Still, I could not make out any clear words. Imagine someone who doesn't understand English hearing the language spoken. That is how I felt listening to this abomination, like an auditory stroke. It appeared to give up after another moment and went quiet. Its mouth instead began multiplying, growing and expanding over its skin like Swiss cheese, until nothing that resembled a human remained. My eyes grew painful trying to focus on whatever stood in my presence. Nothing in my vocabulary can accurately describe the being. I can't really even remember how it looked. As hard as I tried, the form was just mentally incompatible. I can recall dark lines and shape, both sharp and organic, shifting in certainly more than 3 dimensions. There looked to be something peering out from the spasmodic blackness, something like monochrome faces all overlapping, separate but at the same time as one. They gazed out at me with an expression of intense sorrow, lips parting as if to talk, yet any words were snuffed out by that incomprehensible void. After what felt like hours, but probably was seconds, it started to move again, and as it moved, it began to take on a new form. Skin, hair, nails, fabric, all slipping and sliding, until the logo on my polo shirt became visible, emerging from underneath a dark fold. While this happened, movement stirred from the darkness below, countless shifting footsteps disturbing the forest floor. I wish I could describe further and in more detail, but that was the breaking point for me. I dropped the still smoking pipe, spun around and ran in the opposite direction. I ran onto the festival grounds, past a colorful sea of tents and drunk onlookers, before slipping in a cold puddle of someone's vomit and falling face first into the trash-littered ground. I awoke in a medical support tent at 11:30 a.m. Looking down at my arms, they appeared terribly sunburned, and the sight caused the accompanying pain to flare up over my skin. I winced and looked around to absorb my surroundings. A staff member came over to me then, a kind-looking, middle-aged man with a bottle of some sort of lotion and another of water. "Hey kid, how you feeling? You got some terrible burns there, forget your sunscreen?" he asked. Yeah, lost the summer yesterday," I lied. "You gotta be more careful with that, kid. You can get skin cancer from it, you know?" Yeah, thank you. What's that bottle you have there?" "Oh, this? Just something to ease the skin. Trust me, you won't want to leave here without it." The burning that arose as I reached out for the bottle confirmed the statement. My skin was the color of a sunset and felt as hot as the sun itself. The thing is, I did put on sunscreen, multiple times even throughout the day, and I don't burn easily anyway. When we were at the camp, I felt absolutely fine. Well, before whatever happened that made me flee in terror. Chris and Robbie were waiting for me outside, faces carved with somber looks. They had with them all of our things packed up, tents, leftover drinks, all of it. My heart dropped when they told me that they had found Rachel's tent empty in the morning along with mine. A search team was calling to the site to scour the woods for any evidence of where she could have gone, but their efforts had thus far been fruitless. Though I had a feeling they would not even find the slightest indication that she had ever been there, bar her tent and belongings. Robbie insisted on staying behind to help with the search while Chris and I made the journey home. The leather seats in Chris's car were a painful nuisance, sticking to my clammy, sunburned skin at the slightest touch. I didn't have the energy to complain though. We arrived back at my house and called Robbie with a dwindling hope, which, for me, had already dried up completely. But of course, no news had surfaced. Rachel was never found. Even after the case was extended into multiple jurisdictions, any trail the police may have had soon ran cold. I haven't told my friends, but I know now that Rachel is undoubtedly lost forever to something beyond our comprehension. After all, how could they believe me, given our drug use that night? Grieving is one thing, but grieving knowing you can't tell the truth about what happened is a different beast altogether. While I was changing my clothes that day, I noticed something peculiar. My blue polo no longer held the embroidered brand logo on its left breast as it once had. I still shudder at the implications of what may have happened if I'd stuck around any longer to find out. I don't participate in that life anymore really. I still see those friends, but on the craziest of nights I never go further than drinking or smoking. Usually not even in combination. Probably for the best anyway. Those words linger in my head still. This one. Were they referring to me? I really don't have any rational explanation for what happened that night. What those beings were, their motives, needless to say, the image of that pale sun unfolding is forever etched into my memory. All I can say now is that if the sun stops setting and hangs there like a glazed over eye, don't stay to see it open up. Don't be brave or curious. Just get as far you can from wherever you find yourself, or be taken to somewhere our minds were never intended to witness.